Next, we are going to draw a texture for this object, which consists of only one object. But we have, if we look a bit closer, this radar dish, a sensor, and a kind of balloon, as well as a bridge connecting the balloon with the radar dish. Let's open the UV map. Here we have the texture map of the radar alien open in Inkscape. This part represents the sensor, corresponds to the sensor of the alien. This part corresponds to the bridge. This part corresponds to both the front and the back of the radar dish. And here we have the top and the bottom of the balloon, and here the side of the balloon. So let's start by coloring in this rod. We're going to remove the stroke and we're going to add a gradient to the fill. The rightmost side we will make it fully opaque, and let's make it a little bit darker, and the leftmost side a little bit darker as well, but the middle we will make lighter. And in order to minimize the amount of seam, how obvious the seam is, we are going to make sure that the color is exactly the same on the left and the right. So on the left it was 32 and 94. So we're going to make it the same on the right. This still won't be exact, but hopefully it will be enough that we cannot really see the seam very clearly at first glance. Next we are going to make the texture for this sensor. I'm just going to use a rectangle and I'm going to color it black, and I'm going to add a radial gradient in it, and I want the outside of my radial gradient to be black and the inside I want it to be red. So let's increase the saturation and the lightness, and let's make my square opaque, less opaque, so that I can move this radial gradient around and find some appropriate dimension for it. And then let's make it fully opaque again. Next I'm going to draw the texture for the bridge, and I'm gonna pick a gray color, but I'm gonna add a gradient as well. Finally, I'm going to draw a circle for the for now, I'm going to draw a circle for the radar dish. And I'm going to add a gradient here as well. Opening up the model in Blender and applying the texture, we see what we have so far. This balloon, we haven't yet textured it, but here on this radar dish and this sensor we see some applied textures. It's a bit dark in object mode, in texture mode, so let's move to rendered mode, and we see that we have some interesting effects, interesting metal gradient effects applied to our texture. Next, let's make this balloon texture, the texture for this balloon. The top and bottom parts of the balloon, I'm going to cover it with a single rectangle. and I'm temporarily going to make it transparent so I can see what I'm doing underneath, and I'm going to add a circle on top. This circle, I'm going to give it a radial gradient, and I'm going to leave it transparent on the edges, but in the middle I'm going to make it significantly lighter than the underlying color. Now I'm going to take this object and I'm going to copy it to the top part of the circle as well, and now all these three objects I'm going to make the opacity 100%. As for the middle part of the balloon, I'm first going to add a rectangle to cover this part, and I'm going to change the color to blue as well, but with much less saturation, and a little bit lighter, something like this. I'm going to apply a filter, filters, bumps, canvas bump matte, and finally what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make this layer invisible and unlock the UV map layer, and I'm going to trace this part of my bitmap into and use it as part of the texture. So I'm going to select this picture and I'm going to go to Path, Trace Bitmap, and I'm going to select Edge Detection and keep my threshold at 0.65 and click on OK. And now I'm going to make sure my new path is selected, and I'm going to press Ctrl X. And I'm going to relock my UV map, and I'm going to add another layer and name it Detail and move it up to the top, and I'm going to paste this path in place. Then I'm going to use the node editor to select all these nodes and delete them. And for this part of the texture, I'm going to apply a filter, filters, ridges, metallized ridge. Let's unhide the texture layer and let's save our result and export it. So make sure to click on Page first and then to click on Export in order to ensure that it's this whole page which gets exported with these coordinates. And let's look at Blender to see the result. Here we have the results. It's a pretty interesting texture. Changing the viewport to texture settings and looking on top to speed up the performance a bit. I want to draw your attention to this spot. This spot doesn't come from the light source, but rather we painted it on the texture ourselves. If you do that in practice, you should be quite careful, because in case of static pictures it doesn't really matter, but if you have a dynamic graphics environment like a game and the location of the object is moving or the location of the light source is moving, then it might look a bit weird. For example, if the light was coming from below and there's a shine on the top, it would not be consistent. So bear that in mind. In the next lesson we will be drawing a pentapus.